Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this DZone virtual roundtable. We have just released our latest trend report, Modern API Management Connecting Data-Driven Architecture Alongside AI, Automation, and Microservices, which you can download right now today at DZone.com. When assessing prominent topics at DZone in the software engineering space more broadly, it simply felt incomplete to conduct research on the larger impacts of data in the cloud without talking about such a crucial component of modern software architectures, APIs. Communication is key in an era when applications and data capabilities grow increasingly complex. And we set our sights on investigating the emerging ways in which data that would otherwise be isolated can better integrate with and work alongside other app components across systems. Today, we're going to have a great conversation. If you find it valuable and want to see more content just like this, head on over to dzone.com/events to see all of our on-demand content. Before we get started, you've already noticed that we have a distinguished panel of experts. My name is Jesse, Chief Technologist here at DZone, and each of these panelists bring a wealth of knowledge and a unique perspective. So let's do some introductions. First up is Thomas. Hey, Thomas. IT
Hello.
architect at Rhapsody's Concierge, wrote the Get Some Rest full API stack article for our trend report, which is awesome. Linus, field CTO over at Gravity. Hey, Linus.
Hello there.
Pratik, the principal solution architect over at Capital One. Welcome back for another show, Pratik. Thanks for being here. And Gil, co-founder and CTO at Merge. Hey, Gil.
God.
All right, so APIs are important. They've been around forever. And the API management market size was about $4.5 billion last year. The interesting thing is, as we seek to continue to integrate all these different systems, the compound annual growth rate is almost 30%. So between 2024 and 2032, we're going to reach about $46 billion, which is enormous, right? There's no doubt that this is a very important topic. So I'd like to start with a general pulse check. Do you agree or disagree with my statement, and why? APIs are indispensable tools, offering increased efficiency, scalability, and flexibility. What do you think, Gil?
To me, absolutely. I think probably the best way to think about that question is, what is the underlying functionality? It's data exchange. Data exchange needs to happen. More and more things are becoming distributed, and APIs solve that, and they solve it pretty cleanly. So I would absolutely agree with that one.
Awesome. Linus, what do you think? Agree?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I think traditionally sometimes maybe people look at APIs as that glue between microservices and applications within an enterprise. But what we see at Gravity is a lot of organizations using APIs to make money and create better experiences for kind of end customers as well. So I think that's something that sometimes kind of looked over a little bit when you talk about API and the impact of APIs, that it's actually there to build products and make a lot of money for enterprises.
Okay, cool. Pratik?
Yeah, I can't agree more than this. And I can say, like, APIs are like heart and lungs of software ecosystem in today's date. And I can't imagine living a software without an API. And I can pretty much relate to every of the jargon of the software ecosystem with an API. Talk about agility, scalability, modularity, iteration, lean, reusability, elasticity, everything drills down to an API. An API fits everywhere. So it's a kind of a jack of all and king of all as well in today's software ecosystem.
Awesome. And you didn't say SOA. Is that like out of date? I'm kidding. We'll talk about that in a little bit. All right, Thomas, what do you think?
I'm pretty okay, totally okay with my colleagues to say as an IT architect, when we have to choose a solution, if a solution doesn't have API, it is limited. There is no way to choose one. You must have API to get access to the data. If you cannot update the data, it's very bad. Yes, more than that, just data, just management API and other stuff like that. Not only data, but yes, we eliminate solutions that doesn't have API. That's all.
There you go. Awesome. Well, I remember the days before APIs, and we got our datas with ODBCs and JDBCs and drivers and all the things, right? But nowadays, you're right. APIs, they're pivotal, absolutely pivotal in integration, data management, all the things. So they also offer a standardized way to communicate and interact between systems. Like you said, Thomas, if you don't have an API, we're not going to buy it. We're not even going to consider it. And the utility of these lies in enabling developers to leverage some existing functionality and data from a bunch of different sources, right? Which saves time, makes them more efficient, builds applications faster. And in our survey, we're going to dive into the survey results now and get into a little bit of a data discussion ourselves. We wanted to learn more about what types of systems organizations are integrating, right? It's important to know. How frequently developers transition integration paradigms, how they move from one paradigm to another, and how frequently they leverage APIs across microservice architectures. So the question that we put in the actual survey was, what types of systems does your organization integrate? Select all that apply. And here are the popular answers. 1, BI analytics, right? It's 47%. Financial, tied with 47%. AI, ML, or chatbot, interesting, at 41%. Mobile, and then document management fell under that. So what are your initial thoughts about these top systems? Do they make sense? Do they not make sense? And does it align with what you do? And Pratik, why don't you tell us your thoughts first?
Yeah, I think there are a few surprises for me. One is the AI, ML, and the chatbot. It's a bigger surprise to me, like how 41% coming up, because when I heard chat box, the first thing comes to me for integration is the WebSockets, how the push and pull will work in the API and chatbot, and how the chatbot will work onto the push and pull on the APIs. So that's a kind of a bigger surprise to me. Document management, mobile, financial is perfectly fine. It could have been more than that. BI and analytics, it feels like it is towards the future pattern where we are moving towards. You mentioned like JDBC, ODBC, you forget to mention about RPC, like you remember, like remote procedure call, that is the great granddad of
You're speaking my language.
So yeah, so BI analytics moving like they are removing their old skin and they're moving to a new age AI based or like API based integration. So it's feel like it's pretty much okay, but AI, ML, and chatbots are kind of one that it's like a surprise to me.
Very cool. Linus, what do you think?
Yeah, I have to say I agree with that. What we keep seeing with our customers, and by the way, if you use something like ChatGPT, that I'm sure all of us have interacted with at some point, you're typically using them servers and events as that actual asynchronous communication between your browser and that actual ChatGPT backend service. So you're obviously interacting with an API, but it's an event-driven type of API. I think the percentage there is interesting, right? Because it probably kind of speaks to the fact that AI is here today. It's not something that customers are looking at for the next 5 years, 10 years. It's a big thing that people are interacting with already today. So a little bit surprising, but we kind of all know that it's something that every organization is looking at the moment. And I've been in the integration space for quite a long time, and I'm not surprised to have BI and analytics being there, number one. Feeding data warehouse, data lakes with information, for example, using APIs and pulling that data into data lakes from various different systems, whether it's a CRM or ERP system. Typically it's done through APIs to extract that data from various systems, right? So I think a lot of businesses and decisions being done in businesses come from those BI and analytics and data lakes out there, and they're obviously populated from system that needs to have APIs to get that data into the warehouses. So it does make sense to me.
Yep, cool. Thomas?
Yeah, a bit surprised for me for BI analytics, but because maybe I've not worked enough on it. For financial, not at all a surprise, maybe especially in Europe, where you have a regulation called DSP2 that asks banks to have API, open API. AI, ML, and chatbot not work on it. Mobile a lot. Document management, bit surprised. Personally, what I've seen is especially backend and backend for mobile and front end. What I've seen especially for API. Very and cool. Financial, lots of financial.
Gil, what do you think?
Yeah. So this question's actually very relevant to Merge, but at my company, we build integrations with categories. And so was able to directly compare this with some of the data that we have. BI analytics, that one we don't cover. So I didn't have a lot there, but financial was interesting. Accounting is ERP is one of the biggest categories and very much lines up there. Something that's missing, which was interesting, is for us, HRIS is extremely popular. Yeah. And that can sell to any business, right? You don't sell HR integrations just into an HR business. You can sell that into cybersecurity because they want to pull in all the employee data, the team rosters, all of that. So we're seeing big growth there. And then one other interesting one is actually a lot of customers we're seeing are AI ML, and they have AI ML integrations, but they're feeding them with data from all the other integrations.
Right.
So for those use cases, actually every single category, any amount of data they can suck up is important to them.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting the chatbot stuff, but then a friend of mine just earlier this week, who's not a developer, went through some quick class, online class, and built an AI chatbot for his website that plugged into a bunch of documents that he had to answer questions. I was shocked at how easy it is. So and I know we're not talking about low code environments, but these low code environments and the AI stuff, the integration pieces, this whole drag and drop thing is going to be real soon. And Pratik, what did you want to jump in there on, man?
Yeah, so while you were speaking, I was trying to reflect back onto two anomalies. One was the AI ML chatbot and the BI analytics. And I will try to take a stance on it that is slightly different from what I took onto the initially when I was reflecting onto it. So BI analytics now started making sense to me when I was reflecting back while the other panelists were speaking. It's like, look, in today's world, we have lots of data virtualization due to regulation and compliance, and multinational companies are working, or multinational business are working, who are trying to unify their customer view. You can't bring the data from one geographical region to another geographical region. I will give you a practical example. A few years back, my team was building a mobile application for one of the pension managers. Okay. And the pension manager was managing many of the companies, or most of their clients were MNCs. So for example, if you're working for a company in US and you want to see and now you move to UK and you want to see the pension of both the states, you can't aggregate the data, or you can't ship the data. So you have to build a data virtualization layer in between. That's where I'm seeing like the BI and the analytics and the data virtualization is coming in and heavily banking onto the API. So that your each individual tables are organically getting converted into an API. So behind the scenes, you will never realize whether you are actually working on an actual data or it was an API that was virtually pretending to be your table. So that was my reflection on the BI analytics. So now I started also relating with the AI ML and a chatbot, because looking at the popularity of the framework like LangChain, which is kind of getting pivotal in integrating the large language models or a Gen AI models to your custom applications. So for example, if you're creating your own mobile application, it will be very heavy lifting to build your own LLM or a Gen AI to have a conversational AI embedded onto your mobile app. So what you will do, you will try to integrate LangChain with already leading LLMs or a Gen AI, like chatbot or something like that. And how do you integrate that? That's the LangChain. And that is a completely API-based integration. So now I can reflect like why AI, ML, and chatbots are more coming closer to have an API economy within them. And now it started making sense. So that is what I was reflecting about while others were speaking.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, IBM said it. I was at one of their information on demand conferences, 15 years ago. They said in the future, nobody's going to care where the data comes from, right? They're going to get the data, and some of it's going to be live, some of it's going to be from some API, somebody's going to be from a database, and they want to make sure that they get accurate data. But I want to switch gears here a little bit. I made a joke about SOA. Y'all smiled because you know what it is, and we don't use that term anymore. But one day, back in the day, it was a really cool thing. And we asked some questions actually around SOAP, right? So SOAP, REST, and GraphQL, async and synchronous APIs, API gateways, to try to find what our audience was doing in terms of transitioning, right? There was a lot of stuff on SOAP, how popular is REST. And so we wanted to know why people would change, right? A lot of systems lag for a long time, right? We're not talking about mainframes here, but that's still a thing. There's still people, coding mainframes. And the top reasons why people moved or adopted REST was faster client delivery, 70%, right? Specific commitment to HTTP verbs, which is almost 60%, faster app performance, 53%, which we know performance is huge, easier generation of documentation, 51%, and then multiple client support with a single API. So are y'all all REST, some SOAP, some REST? And if so, or if not, what do you think about these top reasons? And Gil, why don't you go first?
Yeah, so we are entirely REST. Reason being, we started when REST was already the most popular.
Yeah, no age jokes.
All that being said, we integrate a lot of, you might say, ancient APIs. We built many SOAP integrations, and sometimes I wish that I could pass the pain along to our customers, but instead we kind of have it. My thoughts here are everyone should be using REST these days. You should not be on SOAP anymore. And if you are, your engineers should be working weekends to get off of it. It's already tough to get people to adopt your APIs. It's especially tough if your APIs are impossible to integrate with using something like SOAP.
Yep. All right, Linus, jump in there.
Yeah, just to Gill's point there in terms of engineers should be moving off of SOAP to REST as soon as possible. So at Gravity, what we do, right, is we provide an API management platform. So our customers are using Gravity to proxy their APIs. And one very common use case that they come with us with is we have these SOAP services. Our engineers at the moment do not have the time necessarily to rewrite them in REST, but our client over here, our customer over here, they need it to be REST. They need to see an open API documentation. They need to use the HTTP post and GET and so forth. But we do not necessarily have the tools and manpower to go and rebuild that. And we might depend on some legacy integrations that cannot change at the moment. So what we do, and it's a very popular feature that we have, is we have something called SOAP to REST, basically. So you bring in a WSDL file to Gravity. We automatically make it into an open API specification, and we automatically convert between, a SOAP envelope and a REST call, and do XML to JSON back and forth. It's one of the most popular use cases that customers come with us, just kind of modernizing that SOAP without necessarily having to spend too many weekends doing it yourself to kind of lift and shift that sort of stuff. So yeah,
developers are expensive, man. I get it. They're super expensive. Sometimes cheaper to buy software. Gil, you wanted to say something real quick.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say we'll talk, but not only are developers expensive, they also hate working on that stuff. And
my gosh, yes.
It burns them out. Yeah.
Nobody but me wanted to work in anyway. Yeah, it was a long time ago. But if I write something today, and we'll get to it in a minute, but we're using GraphQL. So, for different reasons. But Thomas, Pratik, anything on that before we move to GraphQL?
Yes, what I can say is that I work on integration landscapes since lots of years. So I've known SOAP and all the issues. And what is remarkable is that I think we would have to have a look on the adoption of REST versus adoption of agility, meaning that to me, you cannot be agile with SOAP, because when you just want to add a non-mandatory field, you break everything. Yeah. You cannot be agile with SOAP, but for me, that's all. And that's the reason why I don't see any customers from very small SME to very large companies with a very large mainframe. They all do REST, and there is no SOAP at all anymore, at least for customers I have.
Interesting perspective. Can't be agile with that. Okay, that's a good perspective.
So for me, I think I haven't met a person, whether it's an engineer or an architect, who can convince me, like, let's use SOAP instead of REST. There's no point.
I'm not even going to try. I might want to try just for argument's sake, but I can't win. I know.
I fancy if a person can convince me using REST over SOAP, then that could be the best solicitor or advocate in the world. They can defend anything in the world.
Selling ice to Eskimos, that person. Yeah. And to that point, though, like I remember when the integration was all driver driven, and then SOAP was this new thing, right? And then so REST builds on top of that, right? There's a progression of technology, I think, which is the foundation of the question. And every one of you on this panel today know that we push technology further and we adopt those technologies. And that's what we got. I love what Linus and Gil were saying with being able to have like an adapter to go between the two so that people can modernize their applications without the expense. But that brings us to our next question in the progression of that technology, right? Go ahead, Pratik. Because I'm getting ready to jump to GraphQL. So if you want to stay here, jump in.
So one more thing that I like I would be candid to admit, like, I'm very judgmental. So I'm evaluating a vendor, or if I'm evaluating a product that is still heavily SOAP oriented, it gives me a clue like they are not innovation driven, they are not agile, they
Yeah.
are not aggressive on their technology, and that would take me a risk of onboarding them, because if they are like elephant, they are not agile, they are very heavy onto their innovation cycle.
Mhm.
I would be frightened to have onboard them onto my cycle of journey. So that is
Mm.
my indirect way of judging them. Like, if you are still selling me a soap, buddy, you are way behind innovation.
That's not indirect. That's direct judgment.
Yeah.
And it's probably valid. But do you think, to keep, as we keep looking at this trend of changing and doing things better, do you think you're going to have that same opinion of GraphQL in 5 years? Or is there enough differences between the two, right? So we asked this question about transitioning from REST to GraphQL, right? Now, why did you adopt GraphQL was the specific question that we asked. The data we got back was we wanted to support multiple clients with single API, 58%, faster client development, faster app performance, and to unify customer experiences across clients and business segments, which is 43%. So would you, and Pratik, we're going to jump right back on the back of yours. So this is you. Would you suggest transitioning from REST to GraphQL? Why or why not?
Can I start with an analogy? Would you like a proper sofa, or would you like a sofa come bed? So it's up to you. It's like what kind of a person you are. So GraphQL still, I'm not sure whether it's a perfectly demarcated boundaries, like GraphQL is a superset of a REST API, or it's just a kind of a cascaded boundary between REST and SOAP API. So in today's world, I'm still not convinced is a GraphQL is a superset, or GraphQL can do everything in such a neat, clean, modular, and a linear way versus REST API. In SOAP, so like in a SOAP versus REST, we were very clear, like it's like piggybacking onto the SOAP is like wearing two jackets. It's like first having your HTTP protocol, then having your SOAP protocol. Why you want to wear a double jacket if you can live with one jacket? But GraphQL and REST doesn't give me that feeling. REST is more single responsibility oriented, more precise, more leaner in the cases that they are meant to. But GraphQL are more precise for their own defined world of cases. Like if I'm dealing with a CRUD operation or a more database oriented operation, or where my data length is, what I mean length is where, like if my data parameters are varying, or if I have a different view of the data on different times, then my GraphQL could be one of my best use cases. What REST wouldn't be, because REST is very well defined beforehand, and GraphQL is more fluid on that. But in today's time, when I'm speaking in today's date, I'm not clear is the GraphQL can engulf the REST API, or is it just a superset? I feel like both have their own world. Yeah.
All right. Well, Gil, jump in there. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the benefits you listed of GraphQL, definitely valid. I love the flexibility. I've always found it really cool, but specifically focused on public facing APIs, things you're trying to get people to consume. I just don't think it's a fully engineering driven decision. This is a business decision. And ultimately, it's tough to get people to integrate with an API you build. The rule is generally small integrates with large. So if you're not a massive conglomerate, people aren't really going to build into you. And GraphQL, again, it's just adding another layer, another barrier for something to have to learn, for people to have to learn, to have to figure out and adopt it. And it's not that it's overly complicated. You build once, you get it, but it's just another thing. And you release an API, you need companies adopting it as soon as possible, or else you invested all that work for nothing. So I would still recommend going with REST.
Okay, Linus.
Yeah, I don't think anyone in this group has seen a SOAP to REST project fail, but I've definitely seen REST to GraphQL projects fail. It's not a one fit for all type of approach. So I think it works. What I see for our customers, it works very well for customers that have a lot of omni-channel. So they might have one team that are developing mobile apps. Speaking of AI, might have one for chatbots and one for web, etc. And when there's a huge investment in creating those kind of user applications, something like GraphQL makes a lot of sense, because you don't have to build that experience layer on top of your system APIs effectively. You can probably accelerate much quicker. But that obviously requires that your client and front-end developers are super on top of that. So coming to your point, Pratik, in terms of if you go to a vendor and you see that they have a SOAP API and not a REST API, you'd be like, that's probably not for me. The reverse, I'm not. So there's definitely vendors that I go to sometimes. They've actually said, I think GitHub might have been one of them. That I'm not even going to have a REST API. I'm going to have a GraphQL API only, because I'm so innovative and modern. That kind of makes me go, well, you think that GraphQL is the new REST, just as REST was the new SOAP, but that's not the case. It's an alternative to REST, basically. In some cases, 100%, it's delivering a lot of kind of efficiency and speed compared to REST, but for some use cases, for some it will have the reverse effect, I think.
So doesn't fit all use cases that REST 100%. Will fit. So a little bit more. Okay. I'm going to move us along. This is an amazing conversation, by the way. And just to pivot a little bit, and Thomas, this one will be yours. We've seen a recent increase in chatter and conversation around async APIs and API gateways. So focus for just a minute on your understanding, experience, recommendations, Thomas, on like leveraging async APIs. Like, why would someone want to leverage an asynchronous API or an API gateway in their organization?
To be fair, I'm not a very big fan of async API. Yes, there are some use case that requires that, but it's really when you have to do this, and so I don't recommend oftenly to make async API. I oftenly recommend to have an async behavior that lets you use sync API, and to make all the async with something like Kafka or other RabbitMQ and stuff like that. Many use cases are I want my mobile application and I want to put the button and I receive the data, and that's all. So there are not very many use cases. Okay, well, clearly somebody will tell me I have one use case, but I don't see it oftenly, and so I don't advise it oftenly. I'm not a very big fan of it because it adds complexity. Not just on the development stack, but on the whole behavior of it.
Async ODBC is my love language, but it's okay. I'm not hurt. Linus, why don't you go? No, it's not. This is different, right? But Linus, why don't you go, and then Gil?
Yeah, I think similar to GraphQL, it's not a, you should all have event-driven APIs and asynchronous communication. It's really about that kind of flexibility and choice. So we have customers, we have a lot of customers in the shipment and parcel industry, the shipment of Netherlands and Switzerland and stuff like that. And a very common use case that their customers have is, I'm a big organization, I distribute my shipments with the Switzerland Post or whatever it might be, and I want to receive updates whenever the shipment passes a particular point, for example, or every 10 seconds or something like that. Now, I could, so most likely that is going to be built on event backbone, right? So that there's some Kafka or whatever it might be in the backend to kind of ensure that there's applications that can read asynchronously those events and do whatever. Now, when you expose that to a customer, from my perspective and our perspective as Gravity, it should be a choice that is given to the application developer. Do you want to actually consume this asynchronous by nature data in a synchronous way? For example, that you should be able to make an HTTP GET call to get a snapshot or the latest events that have happened, for example, if you still want that data synchronously. However, if you have a server over here and you need a webhook callback every 10 seconds when there's an update, you should be able to kind of have that experience being done for you. If you need to consume that in a mobile app using a chatbot, and the chatbot 100% is going to be built on something like WebSocket or service and events, probably you want those updates to be real time and asynchronous. So again, from my perspective and our customer's perspective, it's really what that end application developer and client wants in terms of building the experiences for their applications and end users. So definitely not a fit for all, but we see a lot of that at Gravity.
Cool. Go.
Cool. So what Linus just described, and actually what Thomas said as well about one example, is perfectly describing, us. For us, we're running long-running syncs in the background. Generally, these are just async tasks that are running. Our customers can synchronously request data from us as it's getting populated. They can also rely on webhooks to receive. But we do have one example of truly asynchronous behavior where someone makes a post request to us and we need to send data to other APIs. So let's say they're like, create 100 employees in my Workday instance. we have to turn that one API request potentially into 100. And yeah, we can fan out. We can try to do them as fast as possible. It's not a 60-second action often when Workday takes 10 seconds to respond to each API request, for example. So in that case, we have to return a task ID, have them check in, maybe send webhooks back. It's a combination of all of these. We don't want to do it. It makes the build more complex. It's another barrier in getting people to adopt your APIs. That being said, it's necessary for certain things. So yeah, we use it where we have to.
Yeah, I agree. And great conversation. I'm going to move us forward again for you, Pratik, but want to transition into the last section of our conversation around how developers are working on APIs, right? We spent a little bit of time, talking about how developers are adopting, implementing, managing, and all that stuff. But really, if we get down to it one level deeper, APIs are so important in software development that a lot of resources and developer time, which we've talked about already, right? Saving developers time, go into creating and managing the APIs, right? So we want to talk a little bit about the parts of APIs that developers contribute to. So I don't want to get into security. We'll do that next. Automation of API related tasks and that kind of thing. So from a developer's perspective, as we're shifting gears a little bit, we asked this question: which of the following primary aspects of API management have you contributed to? And top contributions were: 1, API creation, right? Creating them 75%, authorization 60%, authentication 60%, publication deployment 54%, and testing. So anything surprising in there to you, Pratik, or anything missing?
I feel like that's in line. And one thing that is very kind of a coherence with me, like authentication and authorization 60-60, I was expecting that should be same because very few people does it differently. Very few people have a different level of authorization. So they feel authorization and authentication is same because they have just one role and they have just one exposing layer. So that's fine. I think that's completely in line. Yeah. I feel like testing could have been a better, more percentage, because I don't feel like if API creation is 75%, then who is testing it for them? Are they not automated? Are they not unit testing it? The whole lot of engineering hygiene coming to my mind, but I was just.
I was going to say that's a loaded question. They're not testing some of them, that. But all right, Linus, you raise your hand.
Yeah, and I'm just figuring out here who wrote the. I think it was you, Pratik, that wrote the turbocharge innovation with automated API generation, right? And I found it very interesting, very aligned in how we see the world. So what I'd expect in a couple of years when you do the same survey is that API creation might not necessarily be the number one thing that API developers contribute to, because that part of the thing might potentially have given them either tools to make that much faster, or potentially allow them to focus on other things like API design or just the security and authentication authorization. So just be interesting to see how that evolves effectively as we bring in more AI to help generate those APIs for them effectively. I think what we see a lot is that authentication is typically moved to something like an API gateway, but that authorization, like what the actual API code, for example, is allowed to do, what the resources to get to, is typically done still a lot by custom logic that is being handled by the API developer. And that's, I think, another area where we definitely see with AI potentially a trend to lift that away from them, potentially to have a more of a unified layer where authentication and authorization happens at the same time, and you have a single place based on AI that allows you to kind of really be in control of the different attributes and data that runs through your organization from one single place effectively.
Okay, Gil, what you think?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I agree with everything said. I think here, though, I think all engineers need to spend more time with all of these, because in our survey, one thing we found is 80% of time that consumers of APIs spend is actually maintaining the integration after it's been built, fixing edge, handling backwards incompatible changes, onboarding a new user, updates happening without proper comms. So it's actually really funny. It's like all of these things are mentioned, all of them are important, but I think the most important of all of these is making sure that your team is just not shipping bad things in your API. I think there needs to be more training and education across every area here.
Completely agree. Thomas, what do you think?
I'm a bit surprised by testing because if you are a developer and you don't test, what are you doing for the job? I mean, well, I'm sorry for the sarcasm, but honestly, a bit surprised. And at the same time, the opposite, a bit surprised by authorization, notification. because to me currently it's a one time made for all APIs, or you just have somebody who is managing it. That's what I've seen personally. So I would have thought to switch authorization authentication with testing, but yes, and creation, yes, I guess.
You heard it here. What are you thinking? What are you doing? Do your job, right? So yeah, I mean we know, right? Developers and testing, and we're running a little low on time, so I got 2 more questions left as we wrap up. The first, we'll talk just a second about security, and then we're going to move on to the last question. But really quick, which of the following are major API security concerns and challenges? That was the question. And we got denial of service attacks. I expect, that one's high, 61%. Accidental data exposure, so any of that PII, almost 60%. Account misuse, 45. Zombie APIs at 31. And then unknown or shadow APIs, 28%. So what do you do to combat these security concerns, right? And just, real quick around, and then we'll do our last question. And let's do Pratik. Why don't you go first here?
So for denial of DDoS attack, I would say, like, if you are getting lots of DDoS attack, it means either you are not leveraging an API gateway or you are not leveraging it in the right way.
Okay.
There are smart ways of doing API gateway management, or I will call them a smart API gateway, who can detect like DDoS attacks are coming in. So they will not just throttle the complete traffic. They will just throttle that narrow traffic. That is the culprit one, and rest of your traffic will be unhindered. So I feel like DDoS could be easily manageable with a kind of a smart API gateway management. PII and infiltration is again drilling down to authentication and authorization. You have to understand authentication and authorization are 2 different things. And maybe if I'm supposed to look at some data, someone else might not be supposed to look at the data. So API versioning or authentication and authorization could be 2 solutions that we could deal the infiltration and PII management. Zombies, I think it's more around the engineering culture, like how you can manage your zombie APIs. No one else could help you. Otherwise, other than you are cutting off yourself from the internet. So zombies, you have to keep your engineers updated or your engineering practices updated.
Okay. Thomas, what do you think?
It is very the main topic I wanted to speak about. I think that we will maybe see a cultural shift, because what I see is some solutions coming from the cybersecurity world, dealing with API security, like to be able to discover API, to be able to find some business logic flows, and many stuff that come from really the cybersecurity world, and not just say, okay, I made some throttling and I use OAuth, etc. I think maybe we will see a cultural shift and the meeting of the 2 worlds, cybersecurity and API, on this special topic. And so to speak about the different concerns, I would just give 100% to each point, because if you asking to cybersecurity teams, that will be their answers.
Okay, Linus?
Yeah, I think a couple of similar to Pratik, I could probably spend an hour talking about this as well. But just 2 quick things. So one is that sometimes what we see is that the Open API specification or the async API specification, whatever you might be using in your APIs, sometimes gives like a false security in the sense that this is my actual API. Sometimes what we are seeing is that is not necessarily aligned to the actual data that runs through your API. So it kind of gives the, this is the data that we have, this is the fields that we're exposing, this is the resources that we're exposing, this is the authentication we have. But that might be different between the actual implementation and your documentation. So that's something that we sometimes see and something that we're trying to help our customers address. And the other one in terms of shadow APIs is what we see often happening is organizations having a central, whether it's a center of excellence team, a platform engineering team, whatever it might be, that are kind of the team that you go through or go get support of whenever you're going to expose an API, typically to the outside world. And sometimes that team has standardized on a specific technology, an API gateway, an API management platform. But typically in a multi-cloud world, you have some teams maybe in the BI department sitting in Amazon over here, or you have some people in the AI department sitting in Google over here, and they tend to use those then whatever tools they are in front of them to expose their APIs. I think that's where you definitely have an issue today, even though you can have the most amazing governance and security and auditing teams in the world. But as soon as you allow developers, which you should kind of, to go move quickly, they kind of find the easiest way to expose their data in the APIs. And that's where those central teams need to have that ability to kind of look into multiple sources of data to understand what's going on in enterprise.
Good call. Gil, wraps up.
Yeah, maybe just a slightly different perspective from the sales side here. Again, we sell APIs, and for us, we always have to be on the offensive, I guess, with security. I always say to my sales team, if you don't bring up security before our customer does, we automatically have worse security posture to them. Doesn't matter what's actually happening there.
Yeah.
So in terms of tools that we use, we have a lot. We did them to sort of, make sure we had good security, and then we got, compliance on top of that. But we use DAST, SAST, we use pen tests. We love HackerOne. It's much better than any official pen test, having just human hackers going after you. Intrusion detection, SIM. We also use Cloudflare pretty heavily. So there's a ton of tools out there. You just got to make sure you're taking advantage of them. And then Linus actually mentioned exposing or your data might not match your open API spec. One interesting thing we did from the beginning, we're really glad we did, is our open API spec is actually generated from our code. And so if someone goes in there and adds a new field and exposes it, that exact field, its response type, everything is immediately in the API spec. That's tested against, we catch that.
That's awesome. Well, now we're going to finish up with the lightning round. So 10 seconds, maybe 15 if you got something really great. But listen, API management is huge. We could have talked about this for 5 hours, but it's also evolving rapidly. So what do you think is going to happen? Look into your crystal ball and make one prediction, something that you think is going to come next in this world in the next 12 months. Who wants to go first? Who's got it?
I can predict one. If you look at the word AI and API, API is a superset of AI, and they both are the buzzwords. So I am predicting AI over API is the thing going forward.
All right. Awesome. And under 10 seconds. Perfect. Thanks, Pratik. Thomas, what do you think?
Same. AI, obviously, and security.
Good one.
Clearly.
A lot of advances there. All right, Linus?
Yeah, I think with all these different technologies across, synchronous, asynchronous, GraphQL, SOAP, REST, multiple different vendors out there, I think there's going to be a lot of consolidation in terms of the developer experience. So finding APIs, for example, regardless of the velocity, regardless of where they actually run, should come from kind of a central place for that easy discovery. I think that's something that you're going to see a lot of people demanding in the next 12 months.
Okay, Gil?
Yeah, I think one is status quo at least 5 years ago, and even until now, was that when you bought a lot of vendors, you would build integrations or you would pipe your own data between them. And I think going forward, you've already seen it, you're going to continue to see more of a demand for native integrations for vendors to all integrate with every other vendor that you use.
Nice. Team, thanks. That was awesome. And we could have talked about so many other topics, but really, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for all of you out there for paying attention. Again, we had some great sponsoring partners with Merge and Gravity. Thank you all for being here and for your sponsorship. Now, if you're out there and you want to see more content just like this, right, you can first of all, download the Modern API Management Trend Report we've been talking about at DZone.com, or go to DZone.com/events and see all of our on-demand events. But don't leave just yet. We're always looking to improve. Stay on for just 1 more minute and fill out a quick survey. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.